Welcome back to the studio. Last month we did our first block in the Zen Garden and we have that on the table today. I also pulled out the fabric that I'm going to be using for the outside border and the inside border. I'm not a huge fan of orange, but a little bit of orange will be fine. There are some orange accents in the quilt as well for Zen Garden, so a little bit of orange goes a long way in my opinion. But it's a really beautiful block, and so I want to go ahead and carry on with that today. I really love this. Green's my favorite color. Probably you all have heard me say that before. And this was a brand new batik when I was at my local quilt shop recently, so I was really happy to pick that up. I've always loved batiks anyway. I know some people are afraid to use them, and I've never understood why. They are really high thread count. They give you a really crisp piecing edge. They iron beautifully, and they are washed so many times in the dyeing process that they don't have the reputation for bleeding that many other fabrics have. Commercial fabric is never washed in the dyeing process. It's printed and sent out to the quilt shop, never gets washed. Batik fabrics get washed dozens of times before it gets dried and pressed and put on the bolt. So I always wash my fabrics anyway, so I'm one of those people. No fabric gets to come into the studio to play until it gets washed, with the exception of silk du peony. I would never wash anything I make with silk to begin with. Silk isn't meant to be washed. If you wash silk du peony, it washes away the sheen of the fabric, and that can never be returned to the fabric. So to me, silk also isn't really color fast, was never intended to be washed. So I consider silk du peony almost to be an ephemera, almost like paper. So that's my bit on washing and batik fabric. So we're going to go ahead and get carried on to block number 2. Block number 2 has a beautiful butterfly on it, and this process will be pretty quick. What I've done is also take the color cover sheet off of the kit, and I put that on my stand here. I also have my catalog standing up, so you can see that we have a huge selection of beautiful applique projects available. This is what the kit looks like when it came. Has a beautiful case to carry everything in, so this is really handy. It keeps everything collected and together. It's a great presentation. If you're a quilt shop owner, these look very good in the shop. And in case you don't know, all of these pieces have the fabric in the kit. The fabrics have all been pre-selected for you. They're all laser cut. So you get a really crisp edge on the fabric, very little fraying. It's much sharper than if you were to try and cut them with scissors. It's even a sharper edge than if you were to use some kind of a die cut at home or a cutting machine of your own. I think it's probably the sharpest cut that you can get. They're also backed with a fusible web. In this case, it's Steam Seam 2, so it makes the process very quick. It's basically peel, place, and press. The Steam Seam 2 is repositionable, so you could place it and reposition it as needed until you get it where you want it. And at that point, you're just going to go ahead and fuse it with the heat of an iron plus steam. Just as the name indicates, steam is required. So I'm going to go ahead and move the border fabric and the inner border fabric out of the way, and I'm going to go ahead and move my previous block out of the way, and then I'll pull the camera in so you can see what I'm doing here, and I'll get one of my pre-cut blocks. The background block is very faint, but it does have a little bit of a green cross-hatching fabric, cross-hatching print on it, which I really like. I bought this in just about every colorway. It pulls in some of the greens in the prints of the batiks. So I'm going to move the camera and we can get pulling out some of these really cute pieces of fabric. The kit comes with all of the pre-cut and pre-selected fabric with the fusible web on the backing. And so I'm going to set those here on my background fabric. It also comes with the complete instructions on how this process works. I have many copies of this in the studio, and I don't need an additional one, so I usually use this to collect my paper backings on, and that'll help me carry them to the paper bin. And then I have the color cover sheet, which I often keep here on the side. That helps me if I have any questions about which color of a similar item goes where. Sometimes you have 2 or 3 circles that may be very similar, and you may need a reference on where they go. So that color cover sheet comes in very handy. And then you have a full-size color or full-size placement sheet, and this is very helpful in placing the actual items. Also, you can keep these if you wanted to reproduce the pattern later using your own fabric with your own raw edge technique or needle turn technique. And when I pull this out of the kit, I always like to give it a press with my iron. This is just a dry iron. I just like to press out the creases so that they don't translate into the placement of the pieces. And I can go ahead and set those onto the light box, and then I can scoop my fabrics off. And I'm just going to take a few seconds to center the pattern underneath the background square. Also, I was very careful because the fabric is very faint, and so I took the fabric off of the light box to make sure I had the right side up, because this would be very easy to mistake. So a lot of times I just like to position my pieces or sort them out, so to speak, so that I have all of my circles in one place. It just makes putting the puzzle together a little bit easier. You wouldn't have to do this, but it helps. If you have young ones in the house, this is something they could help do, sort out your pieces. They certainly couldn't mess anything up with this. It's almost like a little dexterity or a little puzzle that they could help play with. And that's probably good enough. And then I like to just start with some of the unusual pieces. You could really start anywhere, but I just bend the fabric over, and you can see just how easy those peel off. And that is pretty much stuck in place. And if I need to reposition any of the pieces at any point, all you have to do is lift it back up, because it's not fused at this point. It's just laying in place. Now, I've never had a problem in my climate. I imagine in different zones of humidity or different factors that peeling off some of these might be different. And if you need to, you could always score the back of the paper with a sharp object. It could be a seam ripper, it could be the tip of a pen, and what that would do would give you a place to bend the fabric. I usually have a pin right here. I saw one on the floor. let's see where this burgundy one. If you score the paper, then you can go ahead and bend it over, and that gives you something to grab. Now, I really almost never need to do that. Another thing you might notice on a pattern where there's a dotted line, this circle is solid all the way around and dotted on this section. That means that that goes underneath the other piece, goes underneath that circle. If you have kids in the house, as I said, they could help place these without peeling the paper backing on them. If they were old enough to help actually peel the paper, you could have them do that as well. If you wanted to do this as a quicker project instead of month by month, as I'm doing it, you could have each child do a specific block. And when you have the entire family working on a project like that, it creates a memory with the project rather than it just being an item. There's a feeling attached to it. It has more of a memento when it's pulled out, when it's used. There's more of an emotional connection. But you could also see, because of how quickly these could go together, that if you have family members with a short attention span, you're not going to have a huge investment of time. You could actually have something that's really beautiful to put together that isn't going to tax them into some kind of a mental attack. They actually could get something done and have a sense of achievement. Projects like this are really great for people who are just learning to get into the craft of sewing or quilting. It could be multi-generational. Let's see, I pulled that one off a little too early. I don't have my big green wing yet. And we're down to just the last couple pieces. You have a couple options when it comes to attaching the antenna to these little ultra suede antenna heads. I use a Pigma pen and just make some dashed lines to connect the head to the top of the antenna. But you could also just stitch them with embroidery floss or with some black thread when you're doing any quilting. I like the idea of the Pigma pen because it's archival safe, it won't bleed, and you don't have to worry about changing thread color or having any issues with that. I will tell you the thing with these ultra suede pieces, we use them a lot for eyes or for antennas. They are thicker, and so it takes a little bit longer for the heat to penetrate to get through to the backing. Also, they're heavier than the other pieces, so you have to be careful before you get to the fusing phase that they don't fall off or get misplaced before you get to the fusing. So at this point, we're all finished with placement. It's always a good idea just to look to make sure that everything's where you need it. I can see a couple pieces are shifted a little bit like this. I could certainly pick that whole thing up and move it if it was troublesome, but it really isn't. All these pieces are still repositionable, but at this point I could go ahead and pull this off and we can get to the fusing portion. That's just how quick these blocks are to put together. So you could do this at a girls' night out, girls' night in, a fun project to do if you wanted to do a group project for a wedding gift or a baby shower, and have a gift to give where a group of people participated together. So let's get to the next step and see how this looks. So we're at the fusing phase, and that's just how quick this is in real time. All the pieces are in place. You can see that they are stuck down. The only thing I need to do is do my pigment pen, and I can do that at any time. I keep a dry iron, and the reason I do that is because to me all irons leak at some point, so I just don't keep water in my iron. And I just use a spray bottle to mist my components. This gives me my steaming element, which the Steam-A-Seam 2 does require. And I have the entire piece sandwiched in between a Teflon pressing sheet. The reason I use a Teflon pressing sheet is because of experience. In the past, when I was fusing, the edge of my iron would have caught the edge of one of my applique pieces and scrunched up the applique piece, and it was then underneath the sole plate of the iron and I couldn't see it, and it fused the piece all scrunched up. So the Teflon pressing sheet keeps the pieces flat and protects the edges so that they stay smooth and flat. The other thing that it does is it keeps any sputters or dirt from the sole plate of the iron from reaching the fabric, either the background or the applique pieces. So it keeps the fabric clean. The other thing it does is it keeps my iron clean. So if there's any seepage of Steam-A-Seam 2 coming out around the edges of the applique, that does not come out and get onto my sole plate of the iron. The other thing it does is it prevents scorching of the fabric. It's almost like a little bit of an insurance policy that the heat of the iron isn't too much for the fabric itself. Now, one thing we do have to do is give the iron time for the heat to translate down through the Teflon pressing sheet and through every layer. So there's a layer of Teflon pressing sheet and through a dot of fabric, then through the round dot of Steam-A-Seam 2, and then through the wing of the butterfly, and then through the Steam-A-Seam 2, and then through the bigger wing of the butterfly, and then through that Steam-A-Seam 2, and then through the background of the fabric. So we have to let that heat go through every single layer and go through the fusing process. So often what I will do is, after I'm done fusing from the top down, I will also flip the block over, and then I will respray it, and I will fuse it from the bottom up so that I make sure that I fuse this properly. If we have successfully fused properly at this stage, this will be permanent. It can be washed over and over without any danger of any of these pieces ever coming loose. The other thing is that this would never need to be stitched down. So you could have this on a kitchen apron and wash and dry it over and over without ever having any form of top stitching on it. You do not have to top stitch the edge of pieces with Steam-A-Seam 2 on it if it is fused properly. Now we do quilt through our samples, but we do not top stitch the pieces. If you enjoy that process, of course you're free to do that. It's just not something we do. Steam-A-Seam 2 could also be adhered to other products rather than just fabric. So you could fuse it onto glass, wood, vinyl, canvas, burlap. And here in the studio, we've done projects on multiple items like that. If you have something that you can't iron onto, you could use a blow dryer and a damp towel and use some pressure and just use the blow dryer for the heat element of the fusing. If you have any questions about that, you could look at some of the other videos on our YouTube channel. And I will say we love it when you subscribe to the YouTube channel. Makes us feel good. If you have a comment, we would love to hear it. If you have friends that you think would enjoy seeing one of our videos, please by all means tag them or share the content. We love to share our videos for free. We're here for educational purposes. That's still just a little bit damp. Absolutely beautiful. So all I have to do now is do my two little antennae. I'm going to see if I can stay out of the way. I like to just make short little motions when I'm doing mine instead of one long curve. But that's pretty much it. You don't need to heat set the pigment pen, but you can if you want. And now we're going to go ahead and finish this one up. So that's it then, done and dusted. Block number 2, we have the beautiful butterfly. You can see I just used the Pigma pen, Micron Pigma pen, to go ahead and finish off the antenna. For me, that's the easiest way. If you're really good with embroidery floss or hand stitching, I know how to do embroidery floss, but I don't want to dig out embroidery floss. And if I haven't done embroidery floss for a while, I'm really pretty rusty at it. As I said earlier, this is going to be my border and inner border. I'm really excited about this outer border fabric. Love that green. So this is block number 2. We have these kits available at the Urban Elementz website. Thanks for joining us again today. We look forward to seeing you on the next installment of Zen Garden. And until then, take care of yourself and take care of each other.